Hello, everyone, and welcome to the kickoff of the Anatomy of Hate Grand Rounds. I'm Norma Holland, Director of Public Relations and Engagement with the University of Rochester Office of Equity and Inclusion. With the rise of antisemitic and other hateful rhetoric targeting racial, ethnic, and religious groups, it is imperative to not only confront instances of hate, but also to understand its origins and how it has incited a new wave of fatal consequences. This series is brought to you by the Office of Equity and Inclusion in partnership with the Department of Health, Humanities, and Bioethics, Paul M. Schyve, MD Center for Bioethics, and the Office of Alumni Relations and Constituent Engagement. Launching our series today is someone whom we are honored to have join us. Wade Norwood, CEO of Common Ground Health, will examine hate's impact on public health. Mr. Norwood is an expert on this topic, having held leadership positions in the Rochester community for more than 3 decades, including roles in public service, education, and healthcare. His work at Common Ground Health helped the organization become a more effective change agent for those most at risk in the Finger Lakes region. His leadership roles at the state and local level include co-chairing the Finger Lakes COVID-19 Vaccine Task Force, co-chairing the New York State Health Department's work group on healthcare workforce, and co-chairing with Congressman Joseph Morelli the region's Systems Integration Initiative. A leader also in Rochester's faith community, Mr. Norwood is also president and senior pastor at the Holy Jerusalem Spiritual Church. Wade Norwood is also a graduate of the University of Rochester, where he received his bachelor's degree in political science. And before I turn the reins over to Mr. Norwood, a few things to remember. Today's session is being recorded. If you are watching today, please make sure that your personal view is set to gallery view. We do have questions. We will have time for questions, and you can enter those in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And we will have 2 interpreters during today's session, as well as captioning for all of those who need it. So without further ado, I'd like to turn over the reins to Mr. Norwood.
Thank you very much, Norma. And friends, let me start by adding my welcome to all of you who've joined us today. Even though it is Hollywood Squares, I am honored to be here and thank you all for coming. As you know, I am Wade Norwood, CEO of Common Ground Health, the health research and planning organization for the 9-county Finger Lakes region. And I am incredibly thankful to our incredible neighbors and colleagues at the University of Rochester Office of Equity and Inclusion, in partnership with the Department of Health and Humanities and Bioethics, the Schyve Center for Bioethics, and the Office of Alumni in Relations and Constituent Engagement. I am, as Norma noted, an alumnus of the university. My wife graduated from U of R, as did my 2 children. And I am incredibly proud that the University of Rochester would understand that in pursuing Meliora, it is important to have an opportunity to focus on hate and our responsibility as a community of scholars to address it. And so it's my pleasure to kick off this series with a conversation about the nexus between racism and health. It is data that those of you who have seen me present have probably seen some of these slides, and I will try and make my way through it and leave time for a conversation on the bottom end. So Emily, if you will advance, we'll get going. For those of who do not know, Common Ground Health is the convener of more than 20, I think we're up to 26 now, tables that involve over 750 folks, representing 240 organizations that really help us bring focus to the region's health issues through our research data and analytics. But the secret sauce is the community engagement of incredible partners like Norma, who really help us bring the data to life and help the community through collaborative partnerships actually engage in action to address health inequity. My next slide, for those of you who know our community, this is an animated slide. This first cut is the region, Lake Ontario to the north, Pennsylvania border to the south. This is the region by zip code, with the color coding reflecting the socioeconomic status of the folks who live in the zip code, the SES of the zip code. The darker the color, the lower the score on this composite measure of things like household income, household value, home ownership, education level, the poverty rate within the zip code, the average income of folks who live in the zip code. All of those measures taken together, the worse you fare against those measures, the darker the zip code appears. The more well-off you fare against those measures, the higher your socioeconomic status, the higher the class of the folks who live in the zip code, the lighter the shading. And were we together, I would be treating this like a Rorschach test, and I'd be asking you what you see. And I hope that you see the very same things that every audience with whom I have shared this map since 2006 has clearly seen, because they look for the cross-shaped blob in the upper left-hand corner to be the inner city of Rochester, to orient. Yes, I know where poverty is in our region, but I hope that you quickly see what others quickly see. That splotch of impoverished neighbors does not explain where poverty is in the Finger Lakes region. And in fact, it tends to also strike people of how wide the swath of poverty is in the Finger Lakes region. And folks, generally, when I say, okay, do you see anything else? There's generally one brave soul that will say, I see the concentration of wealth clearly and distinctly. And my friends, that is the face of our region. And it is incredibly important that we start this conversation by understanding that the face of poverty in the Finger Lakes region does not look like my face. The face of poverty looks like you all. It looks like us. And the companion to this map, the animation, shows the region by zip code. But this time the color coding reflects years of potential life lost. YPLL is a measure of premature mortality within a community. How often folks are passing away before they reach the age of 75. This time, the color coding, the darker the color, the higher the incidence of premature death when measured by all causes of premature mortality. And I hope that you see the interplay between the two maps, because of the fact that I think the most important place to start this conversation is to understand poverty is killing us. My next slide is another animated slide, and I'll ask Emily to just let it roll through. And as these data points run out, these are significant health inequities that exist between the African-American folks who live in our region and their non-African-American neighbors. And what I want you to know is the reason I do what I do is because I hear and see and understand that there are stories behind these data points. And in this instance, I I need to disclose, I'm happy to disclose that as an African-American male, I am diagnosed with both hypertension and with diabetes. I come from a long line of folks on both sides of my family tree who died with hypertension or of hypertension-related complications and or of diabetes complications. Both of my children, my surviving children, have asthma, as does my wife. And I say surviving children because my wife and I are the parents of a pair of twins, one who passed away in '92 and the other who passed away in 2000. And so these are not just numbers, this is me. And I want you to understand that there is a story that is incredibly important for us to understand if we are going to really understand what the health data is saying to us and understand and hear our neighbors when they tell us what we should do about it. As the regional health planning entity, we really wanted to get to the why behind these data points and understand that, as persuasive as he is, Wade Norwood as a focus group of one is not a reliable source of data for action. And so therefore, my friends, in the summer of 2018, as many of you know, we decided to do exactly what the Institute for Healthcare Improvement says is the second law of health improvement. When in doubt, consult the experts. We are very good at understanding the what is going on. We really wanted to have a robust way of understanding the why. And so we went out to the field in the summer of 2018. We were aiming to get 2,500 responses, and the drum roll will bring up the next slide, my friends. We were incredibly delighted that we wound up bringing in 6,855 responses that really allowed us to hear the voice of our neighbors. And if there is a takeaway slide I want to leave you with, this is one of the two. And this slide is a look at, back up one for me. This slide is a look at the folks who told us that they would rate their mental and emotional health as fair at best, if not poor. And that number is 10%. But when you only isolate respondents who live in low-income households, households with incomes less than $25,000 a year, 10% became 24%. And as you pile on top of that, narrowing down low-income folks in neighborhoods that they report are unsafe, whether urban, rural, or suburban, and folks who tell us they have transportation barriers just to make it through the door, that 10% becomes 54%. It becomes the norm to be in fair or poor mental health. And now, Emily, the next slide is just to emphasize our point today. African Americans in our region are more than half more likely to report poor or fair mental health. And I think it is important for us to understand that one of the consequences of hate is that it impacts people's lives. Next slide for me, Emily. And the impact of racism on health was the study that resulted in our Color of Health report. It is accessible on our website. If you have not seen it, I absolutely encourage you to take a look. I'll just do a couple of slides that are high-level data points and findings. First off, Emily, is to make it very clear that what we see in terms of premature death is not something that can be explained away by education or by income. Because as we see across all levels of the socioeconomic spectrum, there is a pronounced disparity between the rate of premature death in the Black community than there is in the white community here in the Finger Lakes region. And so if there is a second takeaway, this is the point, that the disparity that we're experiencing by race in this community cannot be explained away by our poverty problem. It is an absolute fellow traveler of the poverty problem. And so we need to understand and decouple poverty from race. And we need to understand the poverty challenge in our region involves urban, suburban, and rural communities. In fact, almost exactly 1/3 of the persons living in poverty are evenly distributed between those three areas. And an address on poverty is important because of what it can do to help bridge and build alliances and commonalities and affinities between urban and rural communities. And boy, we were tested at that during COVID. But this community passed the test. But I will tell you that that work does not take the place of acknowledging that we have race-based work to do. And that work is really combating racism. Next slide, Emily. And this is one of my favorite slides from the Color of Health report because it is the incredible slide that reminds me that I am not as special or as much of a unicorn as I think that I am. Because as a middle-class Black man who lives in a struggling city neighborhood, it turns out that I'm not alone. It is significantly interesting that unlike white households, 46% of higher income Black households are living in the census tracts in our region with the highest deprivation scores. Yes, absolutely. Our housing patterns reflect the years of redlining, of disinvestment, of limited educational opportunities, of limited investment. All of those things are true. But I think it is incredibly important that we recognize that there are pillars of strength across all income levels that live in all of our neighborhoods. And if we can really adopt a mindset and a heart set that there is wisdom in them thar hills, we will continue to be a community that makes serious progress towards addressing its racial, ethnic, and class-related health inequities. Next slide for me, please, Emily. I'm going to not talk anymore. Just let you know, here are key points from the report. Racism is real. Racism has an impact on the pathways that impact the social determinants of health. And as a result, if we're going to address health by addressing the social determinants, we have to consider racism in and of itself to be a social determinant. As I said before, you can access the report on our website. I much encourage you to do so. And after a read, feel free to drop a line. We have a main info box. My email is easily Googleable. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts and continue to expand this conversation because the aim of it is, like every other problem known to human existence, we can't address it if we can't talk about it. And it's hard for us to talk about it if we can't document it. And I'm super proud of the work that this report does to document that there is a nexus. Next slide, Emily. I think I'm nearing my home stretch, my friends. Yeah, just to remind you of the social determinants of health and to remind you, my background is not in health, nor is it in health policy. My background is in government and in practical politics. And so from the perspective of my expertise, you can animate this one, that it is without a doubt true that the policies that undergird our system were deliberate constructs of human beings. They were decisions made, and those decisions were impacted by the racism that existed at the time those decisions were made. I am an armchair genealogist. I absolutely love the work of finding my family and my wife's family's history. But I understand that I'm very limited in early 20th century adults for who actually has a Social Security record. Because of the fact that when Social Security was invented, it deliberately excluded agricultural and domestic workers. Most of my forebearers were either folk who worked the fields or they kept white people's houses. And so as a result, they weren't eligible for Social Security. My grandmother, born in 1914, is the first person in my family I can document with a Social Security record created in the 1950s when she moved up north. We need to understand the simple truth. Racism undermines all the social determinants of health because of the way in which it carries itself out unwittingly through public policy decisions. I think this might be my final slide, and that may give us some time for conversation. Can you advance for me, please? Yes, dynamite. So let me say, my friends, that because of the fact that I spent the first half of my political career in government, I absolutely understand that if the people organize and express a will, the governmental system responds. And I remember when I came into this world of health planning in 2006, I had a colleague say, it doesn't make sense that you would propose that we commit to eliminating disparities because disparities can't be eliminated. And I said to him, and fortunately won the argument, what I would say to you, that I have been alive long enough to have seen George Jackson's video phones actually become real in the way in which we are meeting today. I am amazed I've lived long enough to see Dick Tracy's wristwatch come true in the form of my Apple Watch. I've lived long enough to see Captain Kirk's communicator and Mr. Spock's tricorder now as an item I carry around. By golly, we even filled in the inner loop in Rochester. It is absolutely possible that we can organize to make real not just Dr. King's dream, but the dream that was shared with Nelson Mandela, who, walking out of prison, said the job of leadership is to make sure that we do not fall prey to petty preoccupations. Slides down. In this day and age, my friend, where literally we might be in the opening stages of the Third World War, we have no idea where these conflicts are going. But in such a time as this, can we not commit to love? That love is better than hate, because light is better than darkness, because life is better than death. And what an incredibly amazing gift that an amplifier and booster of that conversation is the University of Rochester Medical Center. Delighted to answer any questions, respond to any concerns, or listen to any comments that you might have. Norma, I'll hand back over to you for the purposes of facilitation.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to keep you lighted on the screen along with our interpreter. And so and thank you to those. First of all, thank you, Wade, for your thought-provoking presentation today. I was particularly taken by what you said about the numbers, and it was good. It was so good I wrote it down. These are not just numbers. This is me. And I think all of us can look at those numbers and see ourselves in those numbers to some degree. And it all really does boil down to people, right? We relate to people. Numbers are powerful. They tell a story, but people are even more powerful. When we look at these numbers, though, the questions here we've got, and thank you for people who are putting questions into the Q&A. I'm going to choose some questions here. Jacob asks, what are your thoughts on how voting may interact with racism and health? He says, I am working on an initiative called Health, Democracy, Healthy People, which is trying to document the circular relationship between voting and health. Since you spent many years in government, maybe you can talk about that. Is there a correlation?
That is a fantastic question, and I wish we were face-to-face because that question would get a hug. I think it is incredible. The answer is yes, and the relationship is found in understanding our preference for smaller government closer to the people. And so we live in a state where there are multiple layers of government. The political actors across the nation all are elected along district boundaries. Healthcare is one of those things that surpasses those boundaries. The wellness of the community is an issue that's greater than one legislator's district. And so I think we need a different conversation to allow elected officials to understand how health and wellness undergirds everything and how it impacts every community. The map I showed is a very important map for allowing elected officials to say, this isn't a problem for those people. This is a problem for my people. And to the extent that we can create a universal sense that all of this is our problem, then the political process is a very effective means of changing priorities and resource allocations. As long as it's pitted as an us against them thing, the political process does it a disservice. Norma, I'm not getting sound from you. I apologize.
How long have I been doing this? And I'm constantly speaking while I'm muted. We have another question, and thank you for the questions that are coming in. They're so thought-provoking. This one is from Karen. There are so many things that need to occur to dismantle the underlying racism that fosters health inequities. In your opinion, what is the best way for us as both citizens and healthcare providers to move forward in this work?
Wow, Karen, it tees up one of my favorite theologians, Rufus Jones, who said, I pin my hopes to quiet processes and small circles in which vital and transforming events take place. I pin my hopes to people talking to people. Not just to the people who agree with them, but the people who are the least likely to agree. And building conversations that all conclude with, we are in this thing called life together. And what I don't understand, and I think it's for you white people to tell me, is somehow after World War II, the incredible lessons learned in the foxholes and trenches of combat, the incredible lessons learned when Rosie left the kitchen and became a riveter and entered the workplace. Something incredible happened when Northern gentlemen moved down south and saw Jim Crow and said, you mean you're still doing this? Something happened And the sensibility in white America changed appreciably and created a generation of white Americans that were more evolved, but still loved and respected their forebearers. Somehow that process fell apart. I don't know what happened, but somehow it has become fashionable to believe that life is zero sum and dog eat dog. And if I extend charity and kindness to any refugee, it's coming at my expense. Something has happened. And I believe understanding that something and doing something about it so that children are taught to love is essential. I can't tell you all how to do it. I know what I know the Black community needs to do. Y'all need to do y'all work.
We have another question that's come in. What actions can we take as individuals or collectively to infuse tolerance and inclusion in simple everyday life actions? This is a question that came in from chat.
I remember being a young person and I attended a community meeting, and the speaker asked the question, how many people paid any attention to the handicapped accessibility of the space? And the only reason I was able to answer I did is because when my oldest daughter was alive, she was a wheelchair user. And we just had to look and learn. That was a painful and difficult process of learning how to be an advocate against an inequity of why isn't the place accessible? I would say to you, I think the simple thing is we each have got to figure out who and what are the populations about which we are not treating people as humans. For me, it's been rural communities. And roll up the sleeves, spend the time on task, learn how to grow and evolve. I now don't wear a necktie everywhere I go. How do we evolve so that we understand each other and we treat each other as if we are members of the same family? Simply put, Norma Holland, I'd say to the person who posed the question, I'm trying to live like every day is Christmas Eve, and I'm going around spreading cheer.
There you have it. No necktie needed.
Amen.
No necktie needed.
Who am I impressing anyway?
I have a question from Brenda. As a first-gen Hispanic female, I wanted to know what your experiences have been with other minority communities and how they differentiate from the governmental perspective versus medical.
I am incredibly aware of how the evolution of political movement in the Finger Lakes region has tended to benefit from groups competing with each other as opposed to coalescing. I think that the person who raised the question is a very astute observer. I would say that without a doubt, the ability to build collaboration and consensus across race, class, and geographic lines has occurred in the domain of health. And I think health has outpaced the rest of our community in answering Rodney King's question, can we all get along, by saying, hell yes, we can, because we must. And I think that and I know that's the truth because I have convened for decades the African American and Latino Health Coalitions, chaired right now by Dr. Linda Clark, incredible advocate, Reverend Cibran Johnson, and by Rudy Rivera at the Latino Health Coalition. And they have a newly elected doctor who has joined Rudy as the co-chair, and I have failed my test, but generally I'm able to say the four of them, and I know that in 3 months with the new chair, I'll continue to say the four of them are incredible leaders, and they work and they bridge the gap with both communities. We're not there yet in other areas, but maybe by addressing the social determinants of health in the collaborative way in which we do in the health domain, while sharpening and stepping up our commitment to performance against equity. I mean, there are things we got to do better, meliora. But maybe if we can do it in the world of health and talk about where it's needed in housing to deal with the fact that a clear demarcation in health status is that between people who are stably housed and those who are not. Maybe the work that we're doing, the conversations that we're having, the way you are bravely extending it from health to talking about social issues, maybe this is the way that our small and powerful circle can continue to promise and point towards transformative change.
Wade, you mentioned the social determinants of health, that our learners are getting a far more robust lesson in these days, perhaps more than so in the past. That is progress. But there's a question in the questions here from Ken, who says, I volunteer with Reconnect Rochester, particularly on cycling issues. Especially in the urban context, biking is not just a concern for middle-aged men in Lycra, he said, but a vital need for people who can't afford or choose not to invest in cars. Can you comment on the connection between transportation and health?
I would do so happily. And I think that Ken, if he is a graybeard like I, can absolutely look back and say there was a time in this town where the only cyclist that was thought of was the trendy biker in spandex. And what an amazing change has happened in our culture, that community members attest and community supporters can witness that cycling and active transportation are essential across the income spectrum. And I look at things like the inner loop, Ken, and see how a radical reconstruction of all of the paradigms of how we move cars can actually move cars while also benefiting people and building place. And I think the power of place making, the power of place naming is an incredible resource that we have not yet tapped into the way in which we did in health. COVID, Norma, incredible learning opportunity of how, if you are at the right place, by golly, you can get life-saving meds to people far easier than trying to get the people to go to wherever you are. But that's lessons learned, friends, from we've been doing barbershop and beauty salon work in this town for decades. Other people think it's new. There's so much that we have done within the four walls of the clinic that it is time for us to move that knowledge, that compassion, and that love to create, heal, discover, learn. How do we move that out into the community with a real focus on we are no longer going to allow a tale of two cities. We are going to be one community And 15, 20 years from now, when we look at life expectancy numbers, we're going to see that the pursuit of happiness, what my faith tradition calls life and having it more abundantly, we're going to see that that's more equitably distributed, because we're going to see that we don't have grandpapas like my dad dying far earlier than he should.
Wade, so much of what you talk about is seeing people as human beings first, and valuing the humanity in people. We have an anonymous question who has asked, this person has asked a question, and this is something that we're trying to accomplish through these events, is what advice do you give to approach these conversations with people who have different beliefs, particularly political? You only have to look at last night's State of the Union to see that we have a political divide that is more staunch than ever. I don't know, however you want to say. It was certainly a show. How do you have conversations with people who don't agree with you, Wade? Is civil discourse possible? Is it a possibility? How can we bridge that divide by having these difficult conversations with people who don't agree with us?
Okay, this is Wade Norwood pretending that he's a political pundit. I think the most incredible moment of last night, at the moment where the heckling and the brick throwing was its worst, was a moment where the president said, we want to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And both sides stood up and clapped, because both sides want to be very clear on what they value. All the other hijinks occurred, but that moment occurred. And what I have always seen, whether in the role of health planner, in the role of a public official, now a regent, or in the role of pastor, conversations stay on the high road when they stay on the high road. The key to discourse is let's agree very quickly on what is important and why we're having conversation. I really don't want to change or care to change anybody's ideological or political persuasion. I want them to know the facts. Poverty is killing us. And poverty ain't a euphemism for let's help poor Black or brown people. I know we care about our neighbors. And I believe if we keep the conversation focused on what matters, it helps us agree. That's what agree to disagree really meant. It meant we disagree on that thing, but it's not relevant to what we're working on together. So leave that aside and let's accomplish this thing that we're working on together. And I believe that thing that we should be working on is to hand this community the land of Tubman and Twain, of Anthony and Douglas and Jackson. We should be handing it to our grandchildren. Not only not less, but better and more beautiful than it was handed to us.
We only need to look again at the news and the cases of violence that we've seen just in the last month, since the beginning of the year. And an anonymous attendee asks, can you speak to the danger to health, and in the most extreme cases, to life, that white supremacy and white nationalism pose to minority communities, ethnic, African-American, Asian-American, Hispanic, religious, Jewish, Muslim, etc., and LGBTQ+, and what we can do to build bridges across communities so that we see ourselves as allies against these dangerous forces.
I am really glad that we decided that I would do shorter remarks and longer form Q&A. Each of these things could have been a presentation in and of itself. So let me say that what is the scariest thing that I have ever seen but also the thing that fills me with the greatest amount of hope and trust in the arc of the universe, in the God that I worship, is the fact that everything in our society was disrupted for 2.5 years. And it's almost 3 years, and I'm still not used to wearing socks again, y'all. This has been something that we cannot yet describe in numbers, let alone words, to disrupt the lives of young people at the moment that they are most in need of social interaction and support. It was taken from them. We have researchers, you all know this stuff. You can read these journal articles and understand them a heck of a lot better than I. But we actually have proof that the brains of these young people are different. I think we need to understand what we're seeing with this wave of crime as being not disconnected from the fact that the world was thrown sideways. I don't know what it means. I don't have a plan of action, but I do know if we do not think of this as mental and emotional supports being ripped away, we miss the picture. And what the questioner's comment brings very clear is there is different social infrastructure in different parts of our nation. It is far easier to do interventions in an urban setting because of density than in a rural setting because of geography. I am very worried about what the impact of this dislocation has meant on rural children in poverty settings. And it is not difficult for me to then understand the incredible act of hate that occurred in Buffalo. I think we need to be very clear that our common weal is dependent on not allowing this conversation to just be a criminal justice conversation. It has to be a health conversation. And I think we are sealing our own fate if we do not extend charity towards the children, particularly the rural children. And I say I'm optimistic because I am stunned at the extent to which everyone has been saying to me since January what I'm saying. It's good to be back out in community with people. It's good to be able to be in the room and feel the vibration from people. I was at a school this morning at Virtus, and I could just feel the energy when I walked in the door. There is something happening in our world, Dr. King said. And friends, I'm glad we're a part of it.
We've got a lot of questions wanting you to repeat the quote from Nelson Mandela. And for everyone who's watching, we are going to be sharing today's presentation on the Department of Health, Humanities, and Bioethics website. So a video recording will be available there for you to be able to see Mr. Norwood's slides as well as this conversation and listen to it again.
No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite.
Amazing. We have another.
Norma, I think I've done my part. I had to leave you time because there's housekeeping you need on the end. You got one more you want to throw at me?
I got one more. I got one more.
One more at me.
All right. All right. So once again, when speaking to legislators about health disparities, what are some information that is what is some information that is the most important to include to get evolution with action items?
I would say if you could take this slide deck and you all could figure out how in your life you show that animated slide of the face of poverty ain't Black necessarily, and that SES follows the pattern of poverty. If you could help us have a conversation about poverty is more than race, that we have a conversation that we can invite rural folks to be a part of. We have a conversation where they're the experts and not us urban elites with our college degrees. You know, people learn to love you when you stop acting like you know everything. I think this is a gift to us to be able to go out and cure that hillbilly elegy by saying, damn it, you're not alone. We're here to help. And then secondly, the chart that showed YPLL by race, by income, that makes it plain that no matter how wealthy you are, this healthcare system still knows you're Black, and there's a price that gets paid, and that will help us sharpen our focus with regard to the cultural competency, the diversity, the equity, and the inclusion efforts that we're doing, which is why I'm so doggone proud and amazed that we're doing it by doing things like this, because y'all are going to be part of the change. Thank you for that question. That's a clear and easy.
Yeah. Thank you so very much, Wade, for your time today. And as he said, there's more questions, of course, coming in than we have time to answer for today. But again, there's a lot of folks saying thank you so very much. And thank you for your attention to all of this, to so many of these issues. And again, I want to invite you all to continue this work. This doesn't have to end here. We have another event coming up on March 1st, where we're going to take a very close look at what is the University of Rochester community doing when it comes to responding to hate and practical ways to address it. We will have, as part of that conversation, Jessica Guzman-Ray, Assistant Dean for Diversity and Director of the Paul J. Burgett Intercultural Center, moderating a discussion. We're going to hear from students, and we'd love for you to be a part of that conversation. This is a 4-part series that continues with a documentary screening, A Tree of Life, about the shooting in Pittsburgh at a synagogue there. And then we're also going to be talking about the role of restorative practices and confronting hate. And so we ask you to be a part of those conversations as well. Again, you can go and sign up right now at urmccelebrates.com, and you can sign up for the part 2. But again, part 1, this will be on the website for folks at the Department of Health and Humanities and Bioethics website later on. So please be sure to check back there for that information. And yes, and by the way, there are a lot of questions that didn't get answered, but guess what? We have a treat for you. Mr. Norwood is going to answer as many as he can and send back to me so I can share with all of you. So thank you for that. That was an incredibly generous offer to make. So once again, thank you so very much for your time today. And if you can, keep putting those questions in chat so we can have an opportunity to record them, and we can try and get back to you with those answers. There's, again, so many good ones here. But all of this is really part and parcel of our attempt to look at the rise that we see in anti-Semitism in our region, in hateful actions and hateful rhetoric. And this conversation is really our way of saying, let's unpack that. Let's unpack it. Let's do our best to take a look at it. And again, many thanks to our partners in all of this work as well, who have joined us to help make this happen. The Department of Health, Humanities, and Bioethics, Paul M. Schyve, MD, Center for Bioethics, and the Office of Alumni Relations and Constituent Engagement for helping all of us to have these conversations. So a big thank you to everyone, and we hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. And thank you, Wade. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so very much.